The Biden administration is taking steps towards a national renters bill of rights. What in the world does this mean for us as buy and hold investors? What does this mean for landlords? I'm going to break down the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
If you're new to the channel, like, comment, and subscribe, and leave a comment that says I subscribe. For everyone who leaves that comment, I'm going to send you instant access to my free real estate training. It'll show you how to acquire properties for pennies on the dollar all across the country. You don't want to miss out on that free offer. So let's get into this, guys. Let's unpack this thing because there's a lot to cover here. All right. So what is this new Renters Bill of Rights? What is this all about? Well, the Biden administration, they set in motion plans to create a national renters bill of rights, tapping into a growing trend among states and cities around the country to address rental housing affordability. And if you're not aware of this, I mean, America does have an affordable housing crisis. It's just flat out the situation here. I'm not so sure that this is the solution to the affordable housing crisis, and we'll talk about why. But they're saying that this is something that they think will address some of the issues. So, in what it calls a blueprint for a renter's bill of rights, the administration is seeking to ensure that tenants can organize without harassment from landlords, to put more conditions on how evictions can proceed, and to create leases that are clearer and fairer. So, initially, from this language, it sounds like the government wants to reach into, on a national level, leases, lease language, making sure you can't put things in your leases that will waive certain rights to notice, or maybe to appear in court and defend. Some things about harassment from landlords, which we're not really sure. I'm going to dig into that a little bit later and kind of break down what that means. And then also to ensure that tenants can organize. This kind of sounds like some type of tenant union. So we'll have to dig a little bit deeper on that, but I'll break it down for you guys. In making the case, the White House states that housing has become less affordable since the onset of the pandemic, which we all know, with some landlords taking advantage of market conditions to pursue egregious rent increases. Apartment landlord groups responded by expressing concern about the initiative, saying that the federal government should focus on increasing housing affordability rather than adding regulations. And this is kind of an argument of, are you creating housing, or are you trying to just jump in with regulation? And real estate, more than almost any financial industry, like there's the banking industry, there's the investing industry and lending industry, and then you have real estate, which is still a financial industry, but it is truly supply and demand based, and one of those free market industries. Millions of properties across the country that are rental properties are owned by mom and pop landlords. So when you start to jump in with more regulation, even though some of the targeting is at some of these bigger commercial property holders who do affordable housing on a national scale, these things still impact the mom and pop person who owns one or two rental properties. And if you over-regulate, they're essentially just going to pull those properties off of the market. Maybe they won't get into the business to begin with, and you crush affordable housing. Because from what I've seen, the real solution to affordable housing is not with low income housing tax credits. It is not even with government vouchers. Even though those do work, there are so many millions of people who don't qualify for low income housing that really need it. So the affordable housing solution is to remove regulation in many instances and make it easier for new developers like us, like you, which is who I'm trying to build into a new developer, like you, to go out and build affordable workforce housing. That's what I want you to do. Rebuilding these communities, these neighborhoods across the country, because when you go into some of these cities that were built hundreds of years ago and rebuild these properties, you can become a millionaire doing that. And I want you creating affordable housing to combat the affordable housing crisis. But I don't know that this is the solution. It certainly doesn't appear so for me. And it looks like some others agree. Let's dive into some of the, actual nuts and bolts of this thing, because it's so new. It's still hard to find good information about what is this Renters Bill of Rights. It's kind of just like a general guideline. It's not enforceable yet. What does it entail? What's kind of behind the veil there? And you guys, if you know me, I want to get into the weeds. So here's what some of the agencies will do in response to this. The FTC, They're going to examine a range of practices that affect the rental market, including the use of tenant background checks, the use of algorithms and tenant screenings, the provision of adverse action notices by landlords and property management companies, and how an applicant's source of income factors into housing decisions. It's the first time the FTC has issued a request for information exploring unfair practices in the rental market. So sounds like they're going to get into underwriting. Like, how do you screen tenants? How do you push low income people out? Is there discrimination there? And how can they put into place some national controls to prevent that from happening? I guess the thought process would be that people who are on the lower end of the scale of the spectrum in terms of having an income, that they're being discriminated against, and therefore they're being weeded out of the system. They have nowhere to go. And that's the problem. To me, the problem is always inventory. This is a supply and demand game. So if you want to tackle the affordable housing crisis, you need to build more affordable properties, not overregulate the lack of inventory that's already there. But that's just kind of, my thought process there. The CFPB will provide guidance and coordinate enforcement efforts with the FTC to ensure that renters have accurate information on their credit reports and to hold background check companies accountable for their procedure. So that's something that, if you're a background check company, you're going to have to think about. They might have to make some changes to how they underwrite. And this is so important, and why you need mentorship, in my opinion. You need mentorship because when you're dealing in some of these markets, especially in the affordable housing or workforce housing space, you have to learn how to underwrite people beyond their credit score. You can't just rely on these background check companies to come in and tell you, oh, this is a good tenant, go ahead and hire them. Put them in your property. They don't know enough. Just looking at the numbers, it doesn't tell you what's in the heart of the tenant. Is this person easy to deal with? Are they going to be friendly when something goes wrong with the property? Are they going to communicate and articulate well? Do they prioritize paying their bills on time? Even if somebody has good credit, it doesn't mean they prioritize it necessarily, right? Some people have no credit. How do you underwrite somebody with no credit? So what I found is in C-class neighborhoods and affordable housing and workforce spaces, almost everybody has bad credit. So then how do you underwrite a person and not a credit score? I've had a tenant with a 550 credit score pay 5 months rent in advance. Hey, here you go, Brian. And I wasn't even expecting it. This is not on move-in. They moved in first, last, and security. And then a month later, here you go. Here's 5 months in advance. I love it here. How did I pick that person? I didn't underwrite their credit score, did I? So having a good mentor can break that down for you, especially when these things are kind of set to change, potentially. The FHFA will initiate a process to examine limits on egregious rent increases and proposals for renter protections for future investments. That's in addition to the actions announced in November that encourage financing of multifamily loans that guarantee affordable housing. So when you're getting your loans, and like, who will this stuff impact? If you're getting a government-backed loan on your rental property, which usually happens when you still have a good debt-to-income ratio. When you've done as many deals as I've done, when you start getting into like, hey, I got 20 properties or 15 properties, or, I've done hundreds of buy and hold properties all across the country in the last 5 to 7 years. When you've done that many properties, your debt-to-income ratio, it's like off the charts, right? It's just all debt. So, and you get paid to manage debt, and debt is your friend. This is a kind of Robert Kiyosaki, and we'll call it good debt, bad debt conversation that we won't get into on this video. But when you're managing that much debt and your debt to income ratio is out of whack, you're going to be qualifying for private loans. They're not going to be government backed. The government is only trying to back loans that are still with people who have a good debt to income ratio because they're hypothetically safer, right? So for the private investors, they don't necessarily have to deal with this. For the other investors, they do. They have to worry about these things. So if your mortgage is government backed, a lot of these things could impact you. So you have to pay attention to the regulations that are going on, because those are the people who are going to get impacted by this stuff. HUD will propose requiring public housing authorities and owners of rental assistance properties to provide at least 30 days advance notice before terminating a lease due to non-payment of rent. The DOJ plans to look at anti-competitive information sharing, including in rental markets, whatever that means, right? The administration also set out its guiding principles in its, quote, blueprint for a renter's bill of rights, end quote, which, while not enforceable, so it's not enforceable yet, aims to underscore protections the administration says every renter deserves. And I'm not here to argue that renters don't deserve good quality housing. And let's get into some of it because they name it, and I don't want to double dip. These things include access to safe, quality, affordable housing. I love this. I'm all about rebuilding communities and affordable housing. That's like my kind of mission in life at this point. Clear and fair leases. Your lease should be clear and fair. And a lot of people, they don't speak legalese, right? A lot of us are very common folk. We don't speak legalese. We haven't had to read a 50-page lease before. We don't really understand what's in it. Having that be clear and fair, and maybe having some protections in that on a national level, I'm not necessarily against. I'm for affordable housing. I'm for treating people fairly, especially as a landlord. But what comes with that is you got to pay the rent on time. You have to meet your obligation as well as a tenant. And even if the government comes in, or sometimes you lose your job, some of these things happen, but the mortgage needs to be paid, right? So even when things shut down and people lose their jobs, the bank still wants their payment. And as a landlord, you still have to have liquidity to meet those payments. So if the renter can't pay, they should, quit the lease and maybe, go somewhere else there or look for another affordable situation. I think there should be fairness on all sides of that equation, is what I'm trying to say. And access to eviction prevention and rent relief resources to remain sustainably housed. And that's good because, look, I had a tenant not pay on a property in Baltimore, not pay for like a year. And this is in the midst of the eviction prevention, COVID kind of shutdown time. And believe it or not, these rent relief programs, the government stepped in, they cut a check for a year's worth of rent. Over $10,000, one check, boom, just brought the tenant back up to being current. And that was great, right? I did the application, I went through that process. So these things are out there. And as landlords, we also have to educate ourselves on this stuff. You guys are probably saying, Brian, when are you going to put together that video of how to navigate that and how to get this free government money as a landlord to keep yourself paid, even if the tenant doesn't pay? And I will put that together for you guys so that you guys can advance. If you're new to the channel, like, comment, subscribe. If you're enjoying the content, like, comment, subscribe. Liking helps the algorithm. Leaving that comment that says I subscribe allows me to send you instant access to that free real estate training that'll show you how to acquire properties for pennies on the dollar all across the country. You guys don't want to miss out on that free offer. So the blueprint also looks to federal, state, and local governments to ensure renters know their rights. This is all good. And that they are protected from unlawful discrimination and to protect renters' rights to organize. So overall, it's good. I'm fine with all these things. These are all fine. But over-regulation in a free market, like the real estate market, that is so supply and demand driven, and that at a national level, real estate is super micro local. You guys have heard me say this before. It's a local market. From a national standpoint, the government does not really have the expertise or the knowledge on what the solutions are for every micro market. So there is no one plan. We just put this Band-Aid on it and now the whole affordable housing crisis is fixed. That's hogwash. That's never going to happen. This has to happen at the state level and at the municipal level, city by city. So this is not going to work. I can tell you that, and I don't think it'll get passed or enacted. But some of these things are reasonable, and you want people to be treated fairly. So let's talk about Airbnb. How could this impact the average Airbnb person? And this article I thought was pretty decent on the Washington Examiner. Biden's push for national rent control will turn would-be landlords into Airbnb hosts. And one of the funny takeaways from this was, the average landlord, some of this is true, the average landlord has been cheated out of thousands of dollars in rent at some point in his or her business, passed by unscrupulous tenants. So this is kind of like the landlord argument where, tenants just got into your property, and there are what I call professional tenants. These are people who know how to game the system, and you try to evict them, they file appeals and motions, and they're just sitting in your property for like 6 months. In some of these states, especially in places like New York, they can sit in your property for a year, if they want to and if they know the game. So, there are these situations out there. He or she needs federal micromanagement of tenant screening the way he needs another hole in his head, right? That's what's being said here. Like, we really do not need this. But it gets much worse. Biden's minions described in vague language how the Federal Housing Finance Agency will be looking for new ways to, quote, limit egregious rent increases, end quote, on properties backed by Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. So these are, once again, those government-backed mortgages. So if you're outside of that debt to income ratio, if you're really looking to do this at the level that I'm teaching you guys in 100 Keys Masterclass how to do, the 100 keys portion is I want you to have 100 properties. I want you to have 100 sets of keys to your rental properties. And when you're playing at that level, you're not going to be backed by Freddie and Fannie, most of the time. So this stuff really wouldn't even apply to you if it got passed. But if the mortgage of your rental property ends up in the hands of one of those quasi-government enterprises, you might soon find yourself subject to a national rent control policy. So these are things that some people do need to think about if they're playing in that space. Under the Constitution, there's no federal role in landlord-tenant relations. Biden's attempt to create a national rental code is an end run around citizens' economic freedom and a distressing development for people who provide a vital service and are already reeling from government lockdowns. And government lockdowns, to be fair, I mean, they really crush landlords. It's just like, the big banks, they got some relief in terms of, what they got to do. The average person who's just like a homeowner, they got some type of, foreclosure prevention, and everybody kind of got relief. And tenants, you could just stay and not pay. We're not going to put you out because that would be a public health crisis. Landlords got burned. And a lot of these programs that even have money where you could get some free money and kind of get back the money that you lost from the eviction prevention programs that were out there and from the eviction moratoriums, some of those, they would run out of money before you could get it, and then you just get burned. So landlords definitely got the short end of the stick from the lockdowns. They did. Tenants got to live for free. Banks didn't get hurt as bad. Landlords had to keep paying the banks. There was no national mortgage moratorium where you don't have to pay your mortgage. That did not exist. Tenants got, you don't have to pay your rent. Landlords did not get, you don't have to pay your mortgage. So landlords got burned. And, presenting this to landlords is a kind of a double whammy to say, oh, you got screwed again. You got screwed that time. Now we're going to screw you over again with more regulation to make it harder for you to do your job. So I don't know that that's going to help. I think that could hurt things. And, some of these people may turn to Airbnb. Some of these people may turn to different types of strategies out there that just don't deal with long-term tenants at all, and therefore are not subject to some of this stuff, which is truly focused on long-term tenanting. You guys know how I feel about the Airbnb space, and New York just dropped a 30-page regulation document on Airbnb hosts that is set to wipe out 10,000 Airbnb units out of New York. So I'm not saying that Airbnb is even a safe haven, but more people will look at some of those short-term or mid-term rental strategies or solutions as a result of this stuff. So look, guys, I hope this helped. If you're new to the platform, like, comment, subscribe. You already know why. I already said it a few times in this video. Share this video with somebody who you think could get value from it, somebody who's new to the game and wants to learn the ropes. If you guys want to learn more about how I teach people the mentorship program, the links are in the description. And if you want me to build houses for you, if you want me to kind of get you tapped into my turnkey boots on the ground program, if you haven't learned about that, where we build houses for you, we find properties for you, we tenant them, we rehab them at cost without the GC markups, we put property management in place. It's completely turnkey. You can do it from anywhere in the country. We have people in the program from outside of the country who are tapping into US real estate through it. If you guys are interested in that, click the link in the description, tap into my free training, get a hold of me, get me on the phone. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of these days, and we'll talk about how you can get started. Brian Grimes, your real estate mentor, signing off.